Some would call them the heirs to the arm wrestling throne. Of course, I'm talking about Auden Larratt and Etienne Waite, better known as the arm wrestling whisperer. These two gentlemen, young men, will be facing at King of the Table number 10 very shortly, and it is a very interesting match stylistically for both these guys. Both young men, very, very prominent within the arm wrestling world. They're born into a very good situation. Well, particularly Auden Larratt, born into a great situation where he has, of course, the world's most famous arm wrestler, Auden Larratt, as his father and coach and mentor and guide in his walk, where the arm wrestling whisperer, he has become somewhat of an arm wrestling sensation, following in the footsteps of people like Schoolboy and becoming very, very famous through his social media exploits within the sport. But both gentlemen will be having their first, let's call it, mainstream level professional super match at King of the Table. And it is a very fascinating stylistic matchup. So let's have a look now at this matchup. We're going to dive deep into it in terms of what technical options we might see. We're not necessarily going to give a prediction on who would win. We're just going to have a look at what options each guy is going to be presented with, what vulnerabilities they have, and where the match is likely to go.
Auden Larratt.
King of the Table 10, baby.
Okay, so let's start this analysis off by looking at the arm wrestling whisperer, Etienne Waite. He is the shorter of the two men in this competition, and subsequently, that is going to limit and almost dictate what lanes are available to him. Now, if we look through the footage that he has had in professional super matches, he tends to be a hooker. There is evidence that he is able to top roll from that position as well pretty comfortably, but his weapon of choice, particularly when he's doing his social media exploits where he invites random people in and invites some arm wrestlers, former arm wrestlers of all different levels in to compete in his in-store challenge, we see him hooking. We see him containing, defensively hooking, holding on, whispering his way back to control, and then pinning them or letting them even pin themselves. Now, his style is somewhat, I would say, of a resilient-based, defensive-based, endurance-based, side pressure-based arm wrestling style. Now, he has developed a lot of table time. One thing that presents itself pretty clearly to me when I look at Etienne Waite is he is very resilient through the elbow. He likes to take a low grip. He likes to contain someone's pronator, and then he will sit in what I like to describe as a hidden hook, where he isn't actually imparting any active pressure. He has defeated one crucial component of his opponent, which is the pronator, and he encourages, he almost creates a gap, a sense of safety, where he retreats in his arm pressure, but he puts up a very significant defensive wall, and he encourages his opponent to try to get through it. Usually his opponents, they test the waters, they feel that they can't go through center, so they go back into that pocket of safety, and occasionally they will attempt a top roll once again. Always to be met with the fact that his hand is already secured and has already defeated that pronator. He likes to sit there, wait for that pronation to completely bleed out from his opponent, and then he'll either roll through with pronation in somewhat of a top roll from a hook position, or if it's desperate, he can get more of his shoulder behind, get tight behind it, and end with some sort of not a full-blown press, but more of a shoulder-committed hook. Now, this is the style that I am expecting to be considered Etienne Waite's base style going into the match. Although he has a top roll, although he has a press, although he's actually a very well-rounded arm wrestler, the fact that he is significantly shorter than his opponent, Auden Larratt, will mean that there are very limited options on the table for Etienne Waite. I expect his match to essentially go into the hook. Now, one thing about Etienne Waite, if we had to talk about vulnerabilities, it's the fact that he is the smaller man. Okay, Auden Larratt, standing at 6'4", is going to have significant more mass behind him in this match. I can't be certain of their body weight differences, but I would bet that there is at least 10 to 15 kilos between these two. Etienne Waite has that endurance. He has that resilience through the elbow, but he is going to be dealing with a man who has not only long levers, but potentially a higher peak force as well. Etienne Waite wants to get this dug down into a grinding match. He wants to stop the match, and he wants to make it about who has more conditioning in their elbow, who has more endurance and willingness. Okay, on the side pressure factor, Etienne looks great, but as that shorter man and as that lighter man with potentially less peak force, The most difficult thing for Etienne Waite is going to be to survive the opening moments of the match. Etienne Waite's wrist must become secure. Etienne Waite's side pressure and elbow needs to be ready. He needs to get his cup fully set before Auden Larratt drives sideways. If he's still trying to get that cup set and doesn't get it done in time, Auden will have the potential to just fire directly sideways. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, or show you visually, the shape that Etienne is looking for in his setup and moments off after the go, but also more likely the defensive shape that he's going to need to employ against someone of Auden's caliber. Now, when Etienne is setting up, he loves to have a wrist up, shoulder midline. Okay, he's kind of square. He doesn't get carved in. He doesn't stay real open. He's a very neutral-based arm wrestler. He'll have his wrist up, and where his finger placement is, he often likes to have it, his pinky, just in line with the wrist joint of his opponent. Okay, in a perfectly ideal world, he just curls in whilst keeping his pronation high in complete control. Now, there have been moments in matches where Etienne has been able to achieve that, and when his opponents go to low hand top roll, their pronation breaks and it gets left behind. Now, against Auden Larratt, who has a much longer arm, it is going to be very difficult, and it's a very risky move for Etienne to actually go on the offense. Now, Etienne more likely will retreat. He'll actually take his forearm and wrist almost voluntarily towards the defensive side in order to increase his chances of securing a cup. He is trading position to try to secure something alternative. Now, when he retreats over here, that does give obviously Auden the opportunity, should he want to take it, to just fill that gap with the sideways pressure. But being a son of Devon Larratt, it's unlikely that Auden will take what's being given and come into that high hook position. Now, Auden Larratt, most likely, I would expect him to attack the hand to try to keep the hand of Etienne Waite flat. As Etienne retreats and he gives that space, he'll look to supinate and curl against the side pressure of Auden Larratt. The critical moment is going to be, is he able to actually affect the pronation of Auden? If he can, the match will stop. We go into a war. If he can't, it's Flashpin City. Okay, one other interesting thing about the balance between these two, from at least the perspective of the Whisperer, is that there is going to be a need for straps. Now, in the early rounds, outside of straps, there will be opportunity for Auden Larratt to look to just flash pin. He's going to have to balance that nicely, and Etienne has to be careful always to not hold on too much and overcommit to trying to set that hook. If he does, he risks Auden very nicely controlling his ability to deny a slip and get a flash pin whilst the Whisperer is just trying to set that hook. In the strap, the Whisperer can get his lats involved, his rear delts involved. That side pressure can become involved without the fear of losing his hand as much. He can keep his wrist flat then and still have options. Now, later on in the match, let's say there have been some battles and wars and back and forths, it's then actually possible that the Whisperer could go into a hook out of straps. And if he has exerted dominance over Auden Larratt in a side pressure sense, as the fatigue accumulates in Auden, there will be the opportunity much more readily for the Whisperer to stay outside of straps and contain and expose the longer arm, which will fatigue quicker in a bicep sense of Auden Larratt. But that isn't something that you would expect to see from the Whisperer in the early rounds. It's only something that will come through perhaps in the later rounds. Okay, so let's now focus on Auden Larratt. This man has the longer arm, he has the longer hand, and the genetics of Devon Larratt nicely twisted throughout his body. Now, this, of course, means that he is going to be somebody who we can expect to move somewhat like Devon. Auden already has demonstrated that he has a great ability to deny people access to their power. And I think that that is going to be a big part of Auden's focus in this match. Early in the matches, we are going to see a nice tall setup where he is threatening for height, making Etienne chase him and making immediately uncomfortable in the way that the setup is played out. Look for Auden to really stress and create a sense of retreating and rising and pronating static pressure constantly that makes the Whisperer genuinely feel uncomfortable. as we've discussed when we're looking at the Whisperer's vulnerabilities, there is an opportunity for Auden to finish the match very quickly out of straps in the early rounds. We say that because as that first moment happens, when the Whisperer is most desperately trying to simply establish connection to his power, he's putting all his eggs in this hooking hand-based effort. There is already a free access to side pressure hit that Auden will have. Auden will have his pronation already loaded. Auden will have his shoulder. He likes to bring it forward just before the hit and then explode back into a top roll. Okay, there is definitely the opportunity for him to hit that top roll aggressively out of straps. And if the Whisperer is caught holding on, the match could be over very, very quickly. Now, if it goes to straps, we get to start to see the advantages of the tall man come into play, which is, of course, control. The big hand, the long arm, you get to control so much. You can control retreating, retreating and rising, you can control coming forward and getting over rotation. These are all things that are opportunities when you are the taller man with the bigger hand. The vulnerabilities are a little bit different, but we'll get to them later. I expect Auden Larratt to really, if they are in straps, look to strangulate the Whisperer in terms of access to rotation, where the Whisperer wants to get that cup set and that elbow engaged, that shoulder forward. I expect Auden Larratt to never allow it by that constant rise, drag, and roll, and the bringing forward of the shoulder at times necessary. I did see footage of Auden Larratt training with Sandras Sadis, who is, of course, a 110-kilo WAF world champion, and I was very impressed at the way that Auden was able to transition from position to position. He also was able to clearly impart some pretty significant finishing forces that got the nod of approval from Sandras. Now, the one thing that, of course, when you are a young man like Auden Larratt, is it takes time to develop that resilience. Now, we've talked about the resilience of Etienne, who has that side pressure. I don't know that that's quite there yet in Auden because of the longer arm nature. For all the advantages that Auden has in a longer arm, there are disadvantages as well. Now, if we're going to talk about disadvantages for someone like Auden Larratt, it's the fact that his arm is so long. Yes, that's right. Even though having a long arm and a long hand presents many, many opportunities for advantage, the vulnerabilities that exist come down to power when it goes arm on arm. Now, of course, we've already expressed that that is where the Whisperer wants to take it, and that's where it may end up. If it does end up there, Auden Larratt is going to really need to use what his father does very, very well, which is positional efficiency. I don't think that Auden has developed the elbow resilience that Etienne has. With the longer arm that Auden has, it's going to take more time, more years of grinding away in this sport to develop that same degree of gnarliness. His father is a great example of how far you can take that, and it's actually become his strength. But I think for the young man that Auden is, he hasn't had the time in the sport yet to develop that nasty resilience. He, of course, still possesses the weapon of the longer arm, the longer hand, and the table IQ with all the transitions. But without that connective tissue development, it is going to be difficult for him to block at center, for example. So what he needs to be aware of and what he needs to do, and I think it's what we'll see him try to do should the match end in a hook, is use a variety of positional efficiencies and transitions. Look for rise and climbs. Look for high hook with shoulders pressing forward. Look for transitions from pressing pressure to can opening pressure. I expect Auden Larratt to have to use all of these things if the match does get dug down. Now, one factor that we have to talk about that we must consider, even though it's not a highly likely outcome, is the fact that Auden Larratt does possess the ability to King's move. Particularly against the side pressure-based hooker, he is very proficient at it already. Despite being young in the sport and despite having not developed the elbow where it just simply won't straighten yet, he still does possess the technical proficiencies to pull this off. Now, this could be something that happens. So if that is the case, we're going to start to see Auden Larratt really set high and deep at the same time. And as that hooker drives sideways, you can expect that thumb-based rotation, that kick back of the wrist, and that climb. look for all those little details from Auden Larratt. He possesses the skills very nicely, and it's something that could really potentially derail the Whisperer if he's able to pull it off. It's a great comeback, it's a great counter, and it's a great move that really does suit supermatch pulling. Ultimately, this is a match of positional efficiency and top rolling up against dig down, get dirty, gritty defensive hooking. Now, I hope this match does go into a genuine war. It could very quickly become the match of the night if that is the case. Both of these young men, if not are already considered superstars within the sport, are on the rise, and as their debut within the professional arm wrestling scene, it will mean a lot to both of them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this match, and of course, please, if you can, chuck us a subscribe, and we'll keep this thing going. All right, guys.